Good afternoon, friends. Welcome to Telling Conversations. It's a series put forward by Life Focus Society as we talk to leaders and experts in various fields on this whole subject of evangelism and apologetics. We are so delighted to have Mr. Finney Premkumar with us today to share his learnings and his expertise with us. Finney is a good friend and a philosopher, and I'm so glad that I have this opportunity to talk to him. I recall it was a couple of years ago. We had a long chat when we were speakers at a medical conference, medical students conference, and I so enjoyed listening to him. You know, there are people you talk to, and sometimes there's so much that you gain from them. And Finney is one such friend, and I always look forward to interacting with him. And I'm glad that so many of you are part of this conversation. In fact, this is being live streamed, and we would also have the video available later on YouTube, Life Focus Society page. So you're welcome to watch it again if you'd like, or even share it with your friends. A bit of introduction of Finney that you have in front of your screens. He's the founder and president of Truth Matters International, and it's based in the US. It's a ministry that is focused on engaging the academy and equipping the church in creative and concrete ways. Undergirded by a strong philosophical and theological approach, this ministry seeks to challenge the dominant ideologies of our time by presenting the reality of God's eternal word. Finney is very passionate about evangelism and has spoken at numerous churches, organizations, conventions, youth conferences, and mission-related events. He has been privileged to address the Academy of Sciences in Poland and the Czech Republic, and along with being a featured speaker at the UNESCO in Belgium. He has also delivered lectures at Oxford University for 8 consecutive years to the invitation of Professor Alistair McGrath. Finney regularly addresses issues in theology, philosophy, science, technology, ethics, and other related topics, and has presented academic lectures and papers at various universities, including Harvard, MIT, Yale, and UC Berkeley, among others. Brother Finney, it's such a joy to have you with us. I know it's late evening for you, but thank you for joining us today. We so look forward to this interaction with you.
Oh, thank you, Neil. It's wonderful to be here, and I always enjoy my time with you. And I'm looking forward to our time together this evening as well.
Thank you for your kind words. To get started right away, Brother Finney, you have reached a place where you are able to share your input, not just within the church, but also engage with the truths of the gospel to a secular audience. To begin with, please share with us your journey of faith, how and when you met Christ, and how life has led you where you are today.
Yeah, thank you, Neil. Well, I come from a pastor's family. My dad was a pastor and a missionary. In fact, he was teaching in the city of Chennai at a Bible school. He was the dean of Hindustan Bible Institute, right there in Chennai for about 11 years. That's where I was born, in the city of Chennai. Grew up as a pastor's kid, someone who was involved in missions and evangelism all his life. I was very interested in the scriptures, in the church at an early age. And so I would follow my dad and kind of go along with him on these excursions in various places. And I attended his lectures and obviously enjoyed his messages in the church. But there was a battle within me. At a very early age, I started reading C.S. Lewis and Francis Schaeffer. And because of my grandmother as well, got very indulged with novels. So I started reading a lot. And I thought that somewhere in printed material, I'd find the answer or the reason for my existence. And so I was very vociferous and very voracious in terms of my reading. And so I went from book to book, article to article. And at a very early age, I believe in my mid teens, I was practically convinced that Christianity had to be true. At least the evidences and all the things I had researched, especially in terms of the historical evidences, I was convinced that it was true. My problem was not the rationality of the faith. My problem was the demands of Christ. And so I wanted Christ as my savior, but I resisted his lordship over every dimension of my life. And so that was a practical problem for me. And so this went on for many years, and it was a process. And maybe I'll talk about the process towards the end. But it was a process. It wasn't a particular day, it wasn't a particular time, it wasn't a particular place. It was a process through which the Holy Spirit of God worked in my life, and I accepted Christ not only as my Savior, but as my Lord, and surrendered myself to His Lordship and His dominion, and surrendered myself to live with Christ at the center, what I call Christocentric living. So it was a long process for me, but it started much later in life, in my 20s.
That is amazing to know that your father played a very important role in your faith journey, and your grandmother, of course, in her own way. You mentioned C.S. Lewis and Francis Schaeffer. Just as a matter of interest, who are some of the other authors who have influenced you significantly along life's journey in your Christian faith?
Yes, actually, G.K. Chesterton was another one. I read his book Orthodoxy very early in my teens, and I read it over and over again. In fact, it's probably my favorite apologetic book. And then I read The Everlasting Man. And then I read some sociologists like Peter Berger and Max Weber. And then I went on to N.T. Wright and a couple of other writers, but these were the main ones. Of course, one of the central voices in my life from those early years to the current time has always been Bishop Leslie Newbigin. And some of his writings continue to be a source of encouragement and really helps me in my Christian life, in my Christian walk, and in my Christian witness. He has been a really almost a companion in my Christian journey.
Thank you for sharing those very helpful names and resources for others to pick up along their own journeys as well. And if I need to jump right into apologetic themes, I see in society, especially in urban Indian context, which you might be very well aware of also, that there is an attraction towards this whole new atheism. Now, we also have a lot of Christian young people from churches and youth groups who are leaning on that side. And there seems to be an assumption that somehow atheism is a lot more sophisticated than the traditional Christian faith handed down to us from our parents and fathers. Now, you would know well that new atheists are not always appreciated and recognized by other classical atheists, Michael Ruse, for example. Now, what is that appeal that young people, you think, find in this whole new atheism movement?
Yeah, in terms of the new atheism, it's a little tricky because there are different sectors of society that are enamored by them, especially the young people. And I've seen young people in colleges, generally the undergrads were enamored by them. I mean, Richard Dawkins, as all of us know, wrote The God Delusion, and Sam Harris wrote The End of Faith. Daniel Dennett wrote Breaking the Spell, explaining religion as a natural phenomenon. And Christopher Hitchens wrote God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything. So these are all the popular books written by these new atheists. And so young people are enamored by them, not just because these books are somehow um, rational in any sense, or that these books are somehow um, present a strong case for atheism. Young people are enamored by them because they like the style of writing. They like the fact that these four guys, the new atheists, go against the norm of the day. They like the fact that they question religion and the clergy and the authority of the scriptures and even the authority of parents in their lives. And so it's more of an attraction towards these new atheists because of their particular disposition towards life, and not necessarily because the arguments are strong or because the arguments are purely rational or because the arguments entail science and mathematics and some of those areas that are usually aligned with rationality or with rigorous thought. So it's more of their style, and it's more in the ways in which they present themselves, and it's more of their predisposition to question some of the norms of the day, the status quo, as it were, and their ability and their potential and their direction in questioning, especially the church, and questioning the authority of the scriptures. I think that is the main attraction in terms of the young people.
In terms of where we are today with reference to these four horsemen, the names that you mentioned, Daniel Dennett is no more. Christopher Hitchens has moved on. I remember seeing a book and reading part of it on Christopher Hitchens. I think it was one Taunton who wrote the book called The Faith of Mr. Hitchens,
Right.
where he talks about his softness towards the New Testament writings later in his life. And Richard Dawkins today is happy to call himself a cultural Christian. And Ayan Hirsa Ali has kind of changed camp from the new atheist group. She's moved on and she confesses and proclaims herself to be a Christian today. What is happening in the new atheist camp?
Yeah, I think there's a contradiction between what they believe and how they want to live. And they're beginning to realize that how they live is not justified by the foundations that they espouse. So I think that's one of the biggest problems that the new atheists are finding. In fact, that's one of the biggest problems that people are finding for the most part. What I believe and how I live, when there is a contradiction, it creates a tension point. And that's really what we're seeing. Charles Taylor, that great Canadian philosopher, in his book, The Secular Age, he describes what he calls the immanent frame. The immanent frame. And he describes this modern, self sufficient, and disenchanted worldview where human flourishing, where science and material things are understood without necessary reference to the transcendent. So he calls it a buffered self that separates mind from world, making belief in God an option rather than a default. Peter Berger calls it the plausibility structure. Nicholas Walterstorff, in his book Reason Within the Bounds of Religion, calls it control beliefs. Whatever these things are, however we categorize them or conceptualize them, these are assumptions that regulate one's belief. And so, these assumptions that we have, and all of us have assumptions, they regulate belief. And so, atheism is not something born out of looking at particular kinds of evidences and weighing the options. Atheism, I would submit, is an assumption, a philosophical pre-commitment, a pre-commitment that frames the evidence in a particular way and towards a particular conclusion. And so it's an assumption that regulates belief. It's a philosophical pre-commitment that we bring to the table, that we bring to the investigation, that we bring to the research that we do in terms of the evidence and how we weigh the evidence and how we arrange it in our cognitive architecture. And so atheism is not just about looking at the evidence and coming to a conclusion. Atheism is a pre-commitment. In fact, all positions, I would submit, even the Christian position to a large extent, is a pre-commitment that we make before we come to the scene, before we look at the evidence, before we are involved in investigation.
Wonderful. So everyone in that sense is a believer. The question is, what do you believe in, or who do you believe in?
Right, exactly.
Thank you. For the Christ follower, how important is reason or rationality in the whole Christian provision? Is it all about faith? And how important is reason to that faith?
Yeah, let me just maybe kind of lay out what I think of in terms of apologetics, because there are many different conceptions of what apologetics is. And usually we think of 1 Peter 3:15, always be ready to give a defense for the hope that is within you. And we think of apologetics in terms of argumentation, in terms of debate, and so on and so forth. And some of those things may be relevant, and some of those things may be true. But I think of apologetics in terms of witness. Who is a witness? A witness is someone who testifies about God and testifies to what they believe in or who they believe in. And so in Acts chapter 1, verse 8, Jesus tells his followers that they will be his witnesses. And so witness happens in at least three ways: through words, because you're sharing your beliefs; through actions, because you're living out your faith; and through explanations, because you're answering questions. And so when apologetics is treated as a witness, the goal shifts. It absolutely shifts. You move from debate style apologetics to being a witness. What does that mean? It means that you move from winning arguments into explaining truth clearly. It means that instead of focusing on defeating opponents, you're helping others understand. It means that there is no intellectual competition, there is an invitation to consider faith. It means that there is no defensive posture, there is testimony and there is dialogue. And there's an emphasis on humility, there's an emphasis on respect, and there's an emphasis on clarity, and there's an emphasis for love for the listener. And so this approach really follows 1 Peter 3:15, which says to give a defense with gentleness and with respect. So instead of arguing aggressively that God exists, someone practicing apologetics as witness might say why they believe in God, why the resurrection seems historically credible, and how faith makes sense of morality or meaning. The explanation really becomes part of the testimony rather than just a debate. And so apologetics as witness uses thoughtful explanations of faith as a form of testimony about it. So that's how I conceive of apologetics as witness. And the second thing is this: we need to understand that when we utilize rational arguments, rationality, it's not a bad thing, but we need to understand some of the built-in limitations of reason, rationality, and logic. What is logic in a very simple sense? Logic is a system of inference. It's a system of inference. And so epistemology, which utilizes logic, epistemology is a theory of knowledge, a theory of understanding, a theory of theorizing about things, a theory of conceptualizing things. And so we utilize logic as a tool within epistemology. And logic is a system of reference. And so to make a long story short, logic does not necessarily get us to truth. Logic gets us to validity in terms of the end result of a particular stream of references, inferences that you have. You follow a system of inferences and you get to a valid conclusion. But validity and truth are very, very different things. You can have a valid system that is not necessarily true. So, for instance, logically, you can have a rational case for the existence of God, but it does not mean that therefore God exists. What you have done epistemologically in terms of logic, in terms of a system of reference, doesn't translate into ontology or metaphysics, that it actually is, in fact, the case. So epistemologically, you can establish that God exists from a rational point of view or from a system of inference by utilizing various tools and by utilizing various premises in your argument. But that doesn't mean that it translates into something ontological. It doesn't mean that it's therefore truth tracking.
Thank you. Very well said. I mean, there's so much thought for us to think about. You said we can't make the jump from logic to truth. So you engage with people across universities in various places. Now, how would you build a case for Christ in a totally secular setting where people from various faiths are represented? What approach would you take or would you recommend for this?
Yes, I always try to bring them down to the foundations. You see, we can have an infrastructure of ideas, but the main question is this: what holds the center together? What is the foundation upon which everything is built? What is the foundation that holds it all together and gives it a sense of meaning and a sense of direction? So, in terms of foundations, for instance, if you look at atheists, if you look at secularists, and if you look at scientists who are atheistic, they would often talk about scientific realism. They would say that science gets us to the truth, the scientific method gets us to the facts that we see laid out before us. And so the scientist perceives the fact from a one-to-one correspondence. There is a word-world relationship. And science not only describes, but prescribes the truth about the world. And the question is this: is that really true? Is that really true? So let's look at the foundations of science. What is the language of science? Mathematics. Who mathematized nature? It was Galileo. He talked about mathematics as a vehicle of science. The mathematizing of nature happened particularly through his writings. And so we look at mathematics as the foundational model for the sciences and as the optimal way of thinking, especially in the academy, since the Enlightenment. What is it that grounds mathematics? If mathematics is the ideal, if mathematics is the language of science, and nature and everything in the world can be mathematized essentially, then we need to understand the foundations of mathematics. But then as you dig deeper into math, as you dig deeper into the theories, you understand that the foundations are not necessarily known. Let me give an example of this. If I were to ask you, what is 1 plus 1, you would tell me it's 2. If I were to ask you what is 2 plus 2, you tell me it's 4. If I were to ask you what is 4 plus 4, you tell me it's 8, and so on and so forth, because we have an entire structure of mathematical theories within what I call bound variables, right? We have an entire structure of mathematics. Now, if I were to ask you not what is 1 plus 1, which is 2, but why is 1 plus 1 equal 2, and I kept pushing you down to the foundations, ultimately you'll come to a point where you say that is just axiomatic. Think of the axioms that you learned in your geometry class. That is just axiomatic. What are axioms? Axioms are things that we know to be true, but we cannot prove it within the system. We know it to be true, but we cannot prove it within the system. And there are many ways in which we can think about it. We can think about it in terms of some of the inconsistencies that we find in formal systems like mathematics. Without going into much detail, those of you who are interested can look at Gödel's incompleteness theorem, or you can look at set theory to see some of the inconsistencies in mathematics. You can look at Russell's paradox. But the main point is this: if you keep pushing people down to the foundations of mathematical theories and mathematical models and mathematical formulations and the entire structure and edifice of mathematics, you get to a foundation that is axiomatic. Axioms are things that we take to be true but cannot be proven within the system. Another name for axioms is assumptions. Another name for assumptions is faith. So the foundations of mathematics, which are axiomatic, are built on assumptions, what ultimately are built on faith. These are interchangeable words. In other words, the foundations of the most ideal system of knowledge that we have in human society, in human culture, and in human history is ultimately built on faith. Not only that, if you look at all the disciplines in the academy, all the different subjects in the academy, at the foundational level, everything becomes axiomatic. Everything is based on an assumption, which means that everything is based on faith. In other words, human beings, human agents, we are all agents of faith. The question is not if we have faith. The question is, what is it that we have faith in? So an atheist that comes to you doesn't come to you in the name of reason or in the name of science. They come to you as a person of faith. They have faith in science, in mathematics, in reason, whatever it might be. They are a person of faith. You are a person of faith. And the conversation is not between a person of reason and a person of faith, but between two people who have faith in two diametrically opposed systems of thought. One has faith in science, the other has faith in God as a foundational principle. So we are all people of faith. When I begin there, I think that the bridge is built to that which is deepest in our humanity, the foundations.
Thank you very much, Brother Finney. That was so insightful for us. Allow me to kind of come back to you on that position. I also want to contrast it with what you said about the new atheists and their popularity. You mentioned that they are good writers. Okay.
Yes.
And the introduction to you also, we mentioned that you are looking at creative and concrete ways to share the gospel. Living in a post foundational worldview, or even in a post truth scenario, as people come up with these various ways of trying to move away or pitch themselves differently, how effective should a Christian witness be as you go down to the foundations of the faith? Or how creative can we get in getting the message across to people from other faiths? Any thoughts on that?
Yes. In terms of our methodology, we have to be very comprehensive. There is no one method that fits for everyone, right? So we have to be very comprehensive, and we have to be very inductive in terms of who it is we're sharing the gospel with. So, for instance, in terms of apologetics, we've got classical apologetics, right, that looks at proving God's existence and defending Christianity. William Lane Craig, Andrew Locke, these are some of the people that come to mind. And classical apologetics works in certain arenas and with certain people. And then we have what we might call evidential apologetics, which focuses on historical and empirical adequate evidence. So John Warwick Montgomery and Gary Habermas are two examples of this. And so if somebody is suspecting if Jesus really was raised from the dead, some of the historical and empirical evidence might help them. And so that might be a good route for them. And then there is presuppositional apologetics, Christianity as the foundation for rational thinking. And Cornelius Van Til comes to mind. You look at presuppositions. You look at what are the preconditions of the mind. What do we assume? What are some of the assumptions? What are some of the axioms that we bring to the table? And can we justify them? Or do those axioms really hold up to the evidence that we see in the world? And how does it navigate the evidence? How does it interpret the evidence? And then there is another methodology called Reformed epistemology, which is more of a recent way of looking at belief in God. And this particular approach basically says that belief in God can be rational without evidence. It's a properly basic belief. It's not discursive. It's not dependent on other propositions or beliefs. It's like believing in other minds, or it's like believing you had breakfast this morning. You have that belief, and in the immediacy of the belief, you know it's truth, because the person who really came up with this view, or who really propagated this view, Alvin Plantinga, says that there is no universal criteria for proper basicality, right? There are no criteria for what beliefs can be seen or can be accepted as real. And belief in God, by virtue of being immediate, by virtue of being properly basic, need not have any other beliefs built into it. You can believe in God right away. When you have an experience, for instance, you're in church and you're having a worship experience, or you're part of worship, and you believe immediately at that moment that God is speaking to you. Plantinga would say that belief is rational, and that belief is part and parcel of the rational categories and the rational functions that God has imbued in you. And it's very natural for you to have those sorts of beliefs. And so there are different ways in which we adjust and different ways in which we communicate the gospel inductively based on the audience, based on some of the struggles that they might have. If the struggle is evidential, then you go a particular way. If the struggle is with presuppositions, you might go another way. If the struggle is with whether God is real or not, you might go, for instance, with Reformed epistemology. So different approaches work for different people, and we need to be very inductive in our approach and really listen to where the problem is when we speak to different people from different walks of life.
Thank you so much for that clarity that you brought on that issue. You mentioned about faith being a foundational thing for all people and even various disciplines, subjects. We start with axioms.
Right.
Is that in some way related to what Michael Polanyi would call as a tradition of faith or the tradition of an institution, let's say even science, where the personal knowledge comes to bear on what you're working on? Or would that
Yeah,
be?
yeah, partly, yes. Michael Polanyi in his book, Personal Knowledge, if you're not familiar with him, he's a Hungarian physicist and he wrote many books. Two of his very popular books are Personal Knowledge and The Tacit Dimension. Yes, there is a personal dimension to knowledge because knowledge is had by human agents, and that makes knowledge very personal. And that also makes knowledge an artifact of culture because it's not just human agents, but human communities. Communities are formed around specific areas of knowledge. That's how we have disciplines. So people get together and they talk about various aspects of reality, the phenomenal world that they experience through various terminologies. And when a particular group of people start using a particular kind of terminology, over a period of time, those vocabularies become inculcated in the academy. They become institutionalized and they become a subject or a discipline. That's just a short story of how disciplines came into being. That's essentially how disciplines come into being. And so knowledge is tradition constituted. One of the person who talks about this is Alasdair MacIntyre, one of the great philosophers of our time. And so it's tradition constituted. So knowledge is not just something that you have out of the blue. No, knowledge is something that happens to you as a human being, as a human agent. It's not just something that comes to you, it's also something that you do, something that you're actively involved in. It happens through consensus, it happens in a community, in a society, and it's passed down from one generation to another through the traditions that we sustain and maintain. So every system of knowledge, every system of understanding, every discipline has a tradition, which means that everything is the end result of a particular narrative. There is a story to be told, and that story continues into the present time. It's an ongoing story. And within that story, you have various characters who have molded that particular story in a particular way. And so all these characters or intellectuals in the history of thought are the ones who have really guarded and guided that movement in a particular direction. But there is a narrative to reason or rationality. And the interesting thing is this: we often look at history from the standpoint of rationality, but we seldom look at rationality from the standpoint of history. How did we begin to think about rationality? How did we begin to think about reason? What is the narrative build-up? What is the story of rationality or reason? And how did characters like Kant and Descartes and Hume figure into how we defined reason? And how did all those definitions change over a period of time? How did we end up in the contemporary world? There is a history, there is a tradition, there are various characters, and we've got to look back before we look forward if we want to make sense of the context in which we find ourselves right now.
Thank you. That leads me to my follow-up question. We did talk about how important is reason for a believer. How important is faith to, let's say, an atheist or an agnostic?
Yeah, without faith, nothing is possible. Without faith, you would not be able to think. Without faith, you would not be able to form concepts because it is based on faith, based on the axioms, remember, that we build up structures of understanding and knowledge. We really don't know what the foundations are. It's accepted on faith. So we often think of faith as something that comes after reason. We have our practical lives from day to day, and rationality works within that context. And we think about things, we categorize things, we rationalize things, we make adjustments, and we think about everyday activities in terms of how we think rationally, and we think of reason as foundational to life. And then we think that faith comes in at some point, especially when we develop a religious consciousness, or when we're in church, or when we're involved in worship, or when we're reading the scriptures. That's not true. It's the other way around. It's not rationality and then faith coming in at some point in the future. No, without faith, even reason becomes impossible. Without faith, the whole edifice of reason begins to collapse. Because without faith, there is no starting point for reason. How do you begin? Without making assumptions that, first of all, you're able to rationalize in a way that moves you towards the truth. Reason itself cannot show you that. You need something more than reason to validate reason and to ground reason foundationally. Reason has no self-validating quality within itself. So you need faith to be the foundation, faith to ground reason, faith to make reason even possible. And so when I talk to atheists, when I talk to scientists, when I talk to various people from various walks of life, I talk about the importance of faith. It's not just an addendum to life. Without faith, even life as we know it becomes impossible.
Thank you for that clarity and for that closure on that issue of faith and reason. Brother Finney, you've been at the Oxford University for 8 consecutive years, speaking at the conference on natural theology. Now, when we think of evangelism, there is a promise in natural theology, although with its risks that may be there, because you're talking to people outside of the Christian faith and you're looking for common platforms to kind of build a bridge for the gospel. Would you want to share with us some of the nuances or issues on natural theology that would be helpful as we think about evangelistic apologetics?
Right, right. I mean, natural theology can be a tool. Again, we have many tools that we can utilize for the propagation of the gospel and to build a bridge to the culture that is constantly changing. One of the tools of natural theology are the cosmological arguments. And William Lane Craig and Andrew Locke, who recently has done a lot of work in this area, I mean, they've given us many resources, many tools, because the cosmological argument, and if you look at the Kalam cosmological argument, which is a little bit more nuanced, you see that the universe needed to have a beginning, because everything that begins to exist needs to be brought into existence. And that posits the first cause, and that immediately shifts the dialogue to science and the Big Bang model. And it really goes well with Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created. And we know about the expanding universe because of galaxy redshifts. And the farther a galaxy is, the faster it appears to move away. The relationship is known as the Hubble law, discovered by Edwin Hubble in 1929. And so if everything is moving away from everything else, the universe must have been smaller and denser in the past. And so we look at cosmic microwave radiation, background radiation, and the strongest evidence we have is the CMB. It is the faint microwave radiation filling the entire universe, discovered, I believe, in 1965 by Arno Penzias and Robert Wilson. And the radiation is the leftover heat from the early universe about 380,000 years after the Big Bang. And then we have the abundance of light elements. The Big Bang nucleosynthesis predicts the amount of light elements formed in the first few minutes of the universe. Scientists observe the exact predicted ratios of hydrogen, helium, small amounts of lithium, and these proportions match what Big Bang models predict for a hot early universe. There's a man called Robert Collins. He's a great philosopher. I think he's at Messiah College. And he has done a lot of work in the fine-tuning of the universe. And he illustrates the character of this design using a radio analogy. To listen to a radio station, we need to find a frequency that is located in a very small range of the full range of available frequencies. The listener needs to tune the radio just right to get the station they're looking for. In similar ways, our universe appears to be configured in precisely the ways required for life, and in particular, intelligent human life, to exist. And so all these things really build up the case for the Christian faith. And there is an area of apologetics called cumulative arguments. And one of the proponents of this is Richard Swinburne at Oxford University. And so all of these arguments can be utilized in order to somehow convince or move the atheist or the non-believer in the direction of the faith. It can be used as a trigger to move them in the right direction. It might be necessary, but it's not sufficient. It might be necessary, but it's not sufficient. Because human beings are integrated systems. Rationality is one component of who you are as a human being. There are many other components that come together. Your emotional state, your physical state, the physiology of who you are, all these things converge and coalesce in who you are as a human person. And so if you reduce a human being to the purely rational, you've taken away something that is deeply human about them. The emotional is as much part of the human person as the rational. And in recent times, because of EQ, emotional intelligence, with people who have done work in this area, Gary Coleman, I believe, has done a lot of work in this area and showed that the amygdala, which is the emotional seat of the brain, is where decisions are made. And so emotions are involved in decision making. In fact, he argues that decisions are made emotionally and then defended rationally. And so we have to look at the human person as a comprehensive person. The next thing we need to understand is this. Because we have followed the Greek model of what it means to be human, we have emphasized the rational at the expense of everything else. I think James K.A. Smith, the philosopher who is at Calvin College, has written quite a bit in this area. And I would recommend all of you to pick up his book, You Are What You Love, because he argues that it's not just how we think that determines what we love. It is what we love that essentially determines how we think. It is what we love that essentially determines how we think. What we love navigates and circumscribes the boundaries within which we think and the direction of our thought. And so there are many things that converge and coalesce in the human person. And when we talk about discipleship, maybe we can talk about this more, but let me just mention it here. Even within the Christian church, sometimes we are so concerned about orthodoxy and orthopraxis. Very important things. Knowing the right doctrines, orthodoxy, very important. We need to understand what we believe, and we need to know why we believe what we believe. Doctrine is very, very important. Orthopraxy, how we practice, what we do, what we undertake, how we manifest the ways in which we think, how we manifest our Christian life in concrete ways in this world, very, very important. Orthodoxy, right doctrine; orthopraxy, right practice. But do you know what integrates them together? What brings them together? What converges them together? Orthocardia, the right heart. God is not just trying to bring about the right thoughts and the right actions. He is trying to form the right heart, the right affections, the right emotions, the right intimations, the right conclusions, the right predispositions. He is trying to rework, re-engineer, reorient our heart towards Him. Because as Augustine once said, He has made us for Himself, and our hearts are restless until we find our rest in Him. So we've got to understand the human person as a comprehensive, integrated entity, and we shouldn't do one thing at the expense of the other things. So when we do evangelism, when we use apologetics, when we use especially natural theology, all the evidences, those can be tools, but we have to use them sparingly, because a human person is more than just reason, more than just rationality. Rationality or reason is one component of the entire nature of what it means to be human.
Thank you very much. That sits in line with what you said earlier about witness as the key word in sharing about what God has done in our lives over against reason or argumentation. Thanks, Finney, for that one. Quickly, would you want to comment on AI and artificial general intelligence, the way it's moving into culture across various domains? with all the opportunities and threats that might be there, can machines think? And what about transhumanism? We probably will have you again with us sometime later this year, Finney. But if you want to make a brief remark on this whole opportunity and threat of AI and AGI.
Yes, yes. I mean, that's a vast, vast subject. Let me just be very brief, and maybe we can do another session on AI and AGI and so on. So, when you think about AI, it's very confusing. We live in a technologically saturated environment. I would recommend an amazing book for all of you who are listening, for those of you who might listen to it later on as well. The Technological Society by Jacques Ellul. The Technological Society by Jacques Ellul. He was ahead of his time, a very prophetic book. So, with all the confusion about AI, we hear so much in the media, we are bombarded by so much. With all the confusion, let me just define artificial intelligence in terms of two dimensions. When you think of AI, think of two things: weak AI and strong AI. Weak AI is AI as a tool. So, the Siri on your phone, self driving cars, automated systems, all these things are examples of weak AI. So, what is strong AI? Strong AI is often referred to as AGI, Artificial General Intelligence. What does that mean? It means that AI in the future, because of scalability and exponential growth, will become human like. What does that mean? It means that AI will become sentient and conscious and will exhibit a sense of agency that is similar to the agency that human beings seem to exhibit. So AI will become exactly or almost like human beings so that you won't be able to differentiate difference between one and the other. All of this goes back the question that Neil asked earlier, can machines really think, to about the 1950s, to Alan Turing, the British polymath. It all began with sci-fi movies, and Alan Turing was enamored by them, and in 1950 he wrote an article in the journal Mind, and he asked this question: can machines really think? In 1956, the Dartmouth Conference convened with all the fathers of AI, and John McCarthy, for the first time, defined AI, or artificial intelligence. Machines that can do the tasks that human beings do and trick human beings into thinking that they were human as well. That's how it all began. That's the definition of AI. It goes back to the Turing test. And so all of these things happened. And over a period of time, the 70s, 80s, we had machine learning, and then we had deep learning, and then we have artificial neural networks, and all these things began advancing. And all the other countries, especially Japan, spent about $400 million back in the 70s in order to really ramp up the AI project and the AI programs. And that brings us to a contemporary time. One of the most important questions in AI right now is this: will AGI be possible? We know that AI tools are very potent. We know that we're going to be utilizing them. We know that they get into all the different areas of culture and society. If you go to healthcare, if you go to engineering, if you go to marketing or business, whatever it is, it streamlines the process. And so it's utilized everywhere. That's already there. And the ethical questions that go with that. Let me focus on AGI because a question there makes us reconsider what it means to be human. If AGI is possible, if computers really become like human beings, if they have agency, if they have sentience and consciousness, then what does it mean to be human anymore? Does it really matter if we're human beings? The first thing is this: there is a confusion of complexity and agency. Complex things, because of scalability and exponential growth, does not mean that they'll end up with agency. Why? Because a computer is purely quantitative. It's an accumulation of physical components. In terms of the programming, the system of instructions that you enter into the computer, it's a succession of physical states. And complexity in terms of physical states does not move it in the foreseeable future into a qualitative state, which is what is needed for sentience and consciousness and agency. Let me put it another way. If you want a computer to replicate humanity, that computer has to replicate all the features of humanity. We don't have time to look into all of them. Let me mention three of them. First of all, it has to replicate the brain. But the question is this: do we even understand the brain in order to embed it in a system? An average human brain has about 86 billion neurons and about 100 trillion connections between them. When we have a thought or a concept, there is a saturation of neurotransmitters. We don't understand the causal factors in the brain because every cause has a particular effect, but every effect can have multiple number of causes. And sometimes we attribute causes that are not the actual causes. We don't understand if the neuron is the basic unit of the brain, and we don't understand if the causal factors that we attribute are actually the actual causes in the brain. Second problem, consciousness. What is consciousness? We don't understand it completely. This is often called the hard problem of consciousness, following David Chalmers, a famous philosopher from Australia. What is the hard problem of consciousness? Subjective state experiences. It's not just a physical state. I am aware of my physical state. So there is a state in me that transcends the physical state, that is not reducible to the physical state. And I'm aware, self-aware of my physical state right now. Let me just kind of give you an illustration to show you the point, because we don't have a comprehensive understanding, but let me give you an inkling of what consciousness is. When I think, is my brain doing the thinking, or am I doing the thinking utilizing my brain? When I walk, is my leg doing the walking, or am I doing the walking utilizing my leg? The I that does the thinking and the walking, but is not reducible to the brain or the leg, is what we call consciousness. Okay? So let me give you another example in terms of an AI system, in terms of subjective state experiences that they can never have. Let's say I'm eating a slice of pizza. The enzymes in my mouth break it down and it goes down my digestive tract. Let's say there's an AI system right next to me and it's simulating everything one for one in one-to-one correspondence. So it simulates the digestive tract in my body and it simulates it exactly as it's happening. That doesn't mean that I take a slice of pizza and shove it into the AI system. Why? Because the AI system will never know what it feels like to eat a slice of pizza. The AI system does not see, does not feel, it does not know. These are all data points. And all this was brought to light in 1997, May 12th, 1997. What happened? Garry Kasparov, the greatest of Russian champions, played a game of chess with Deep Blue, an AI system that was engineered by IBM. And so both of them played this game of chess, and Garry Kasparov lost. And he was absolutely distraught that he had lost to a machine. And he said, human beings have lost their worth, value, and dignity. How could I lose to a machine? But you see, Deep Blue could calculate 100 million moves in 1 minute. There is no way Garry Kasparov could have beat that system. Someone who was writing, I don't remember the name of the professor, I believe he was at NYU. He wrote an article a couple of days later and he asked this question: now that Deep Blue has won, what is Deep Blue going to do? Is it going to take Deep Pink on a date to celebrate its victory? And the answer is absolutely not, because Deep Blue does not know that it won. Deep Blue does not even know that it played a game of chess, because Deep Blue is an algorithmic, computational, syntax-driven system. It has no semantic content, which is what human beings have. What is semantics? Intentionality, meaning, understanding, all these qualitative aspects that AI systems don't have. So we are qualitatively different from the AI system. We are different in kind and not just different in degree. Okay? AI systems will have human level intelligence, but they will never have human like intelligence. That is a technical impossibility. It's a difference in kind, not a difference in degree. AI will be able to simulate, but it'll never replicate humanity. And simulation is like virtual reality. It's almost real, but not necessarily real. A book that I would recommend for all of you is by John Searle, Minds, Brains, and Science, written in the 1980s. And it talks about an illustration called the Chinese room argument that dismantled the AI program at MIT and Stanford at that time. And that's when we started utilizing the term simulation rather than replication. We recognized that there is something in the human person that is non-replicatable, the image of God that cannot be created or transferred. There is no code for the human soul. There is no code for the mind. There is no code for the imago Dei. We are made in the image of God from the top down. AI systems are not imago Dei, they are imago hominis from the bottom up. We have designed or manufactured AI systems. We have not even created them. That's a key thing to understand. We have manufactured them from pre-existing materials, and they bear our limited image, imago hominis. We have been created by God out of nothing, creation ex nihilo, and we manifest something of God in us, something of the transcendent. Given 1,000,000 years, AI systems will never become like human beings. It's not a matter of increased complexity, it's a matter of principled impossibility.
Thank you so much for covering so much ground in the short time that we had. We have one last question, but before I go there, I want to make this announcement that we would have telling conversations every second Saturday. So look forward to further notifications from the Life Focus Society. And I also want to take this moment to thank Brother Finney for sharing his knowledge, his experience, his learning with us. And not just that, he has pointed us to various authors and books. We so appreciate this good generosity and good work that you have done, Finney. God bless you. God bless your ministry. And here comes the last question to you for the day, which is, what would be your advice? Living in a challenging world, techno-saturated world, multi-ethnic, socio-economic, religious backgrounds, what would be your advice to a Christ follower in terms of discipleship?
Yes, that's a very important question. Let me begin with a quote by Charles Spurgeon, one of the greatest preachers of his time. He said, "Settle the center and everything else will fall in place." Settle the center and everything else will fall in place. The problem in the Christian life, the problem in the Christian journey, the problem in Christian discipleship is an unsettled center, constantly shifting back and forth in a confusing, chaotic, and convoluted world. And the world is constantly vying for our loyalties, constantly trying to divide us and pull us away, constantly enticing us away from the things of God. Settle the center in your life. Settle the center in your life journey. Live a Christocentric life. Discipleship is not about negotiating. It's about surrendering. Every day, surrender to Christ, giving over of yourself to Him, surrendering your all, and asking Him to take over every dimension, every avenue, and every area of your life. For those of you who are listening, who might be struggling about God, who might be asking questions, is there a God? Does He care? Does He know what I'm going through? Does He know my life situations, my life circumstances? There is so much I'm facing. There is so much that I'm going through. Nobody seems to care. Does God care? You know what the sad thing is? We know that AI systems don't have emotions. They have data points. These are not subjective state experiences. And so these are things that trick us into thinking that they have these emotions. But one young person once said, in a world where there is no empathy, digital empathy is empathy enough. So we are living in a world where people feel a sense of disillusionment, feel a sense of being lost. I think one author called it being in a rented world. You don't seem to belong, and nothing seems to belong to you. It's almost like this rented world that is here today and gone tomorrow. There is nothing holding you down. I would tell you that Christ is on your trail. He is a God who will never desert you. And He is on your trail and He is pursuing you, just like He pursued the Samaritan woman by the well. At the lowest point in her life, He lifted her up. When we think about salvation, and let me just conclude with this, we often think of something dramatic. We think of Paul and his conversion. We think of the Damascus Road experience, something very dramatic. You come to encounter Christ and you're changed in that instance. And that happens, and praise God for that. Praise God for the Damascus Road experience. But I want to talk to you, for those who are struggling in your life, I want to talk to you about the Emmaus Road experience. What is the Emmaus Road experience? The Emmaus Road experience is the experience I had, the pathway that I walked, where there was always confusion and chaos, where things were not clear. I couldn't even see Christ who was walking beside me. I took 2 steps back before taking 1 step forward, and I could not understand anything. But my dear friend, the Christ who walks the Damascus Road walks the Emmaus Road as well. And he'll meet you at the point of your need. And he will open your eyes to who he is, to who he is. So even in that Emmaus Road, Christ walks that road in order to draw you to himself. And he's walking your road at this very moment. Don't be disheartened. He is nearer to you than you can ever imagine. St. Augustine once said, God is nearer to us than we are to ourselves, and he will make himself known to you.
Thank you, Brother Finney. On that note, thank you, friends, for joining us today. May God be with you in your life's journey and make you also a blessing and a witness to others of his saving grace and his help and lordship. Thank you, one and all. God bless you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.